click through again.
Okay, so I'll just introduce myself again. Hi everybody, it's Rohanna here from Rosa. I'm really delighted to welcome you to this webinar today, and just to acknowledge that we know it's a really bizarre time for everyone at the moment. It's a completely surreal situation. So thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm really happy to introduce Sam, Marchu and Natasha from the wonderful Women for Refugee Women, and they will be presenting this webinar about telling stories and creating change. And I just want to run through, before I let them speak, I just want to run through a few housekeeping bits of information here. So I'm assuming everyone can hear me okay. If you can't for any reason, just put a quick message in the chat box. Otherwise, I'm assuming that you can all hear me. There is a handout that Sam, Marchu and Natasha have developed. So I've put a link to the Google Doc in the chat function. And just to let you know, if you can't see that at the moment, I'll keep posting that throughout the webinar so that you and new attendees can continue to access that. After the webinar is completed, we will be posting a link to the recording on our website. So that will be in a few days' time, it should be up. So if you want to look at it again, you'll have the opportunity to do so. And what we normally do is transcribe the webinar as well. So that might take us a bit longer than normal at the moment because we're lower staffed, as I'm sure many organisations are at the moment. So bear with us on that, and it's definitely on the agenda. We'll be announcing the next webinar shortly, so just keep an eye on social media and newsletter for that. And we really welcome any feedback you've got. You can post it in the chat function or you can email me. I'll put my email address in the chat box here. Or I'm sure Women for Refugee Women would be really happy for you to contact them directly if you'd like to. So I'm not going to take up any more of your time. Sam, Marchu and Natasha, I'm really delighted to welcome you along and let you speak now.
Thank you so much, Rohanna. We're really delighted to be here, and it's exciting to see how many of you are with us today. Obviously, this webinar is taking place in such a different situation to the one that we envisaged when we were first talking about it with Rosa. A lot of the work that we're going to be talking about today is really changing right now. I felt quite moved actually when we were checking through the slides just before coming in, because you'll see the importance when we go through the slides and the work that we do on storytelling, just how important face-to-face work is for us. The genuine, personal, empathetic connection that we try and build with refugee and asylum seeking women in order to enable storytelling and connections to new audiences and pressure for policy change. And you know, the way that we're working has changed so suddenly, as I know it has for so many of you. And we had to take the decision, which was very hard and emotional for us, to suspend all our face-to-face activities this week. So obviously we were discussing on Monday, you know, should we go ahead with this webinar when everything's changing? We thought it's really, really important to go ahead with it. It's important for us. It's important to continue talking about the work we do, the learning that we've developed about how to enable and empower women to tell stories, to connect them to wide audiences, and to use that as pressure for policy change. But we also feel that even in this changing situation, you know, the importance of these values, it's not going to go away, and it's got to be the basis of all our work going forward, even if we're going to have to develop some new ways of doing that. Now, as a team, we're really, really not used to working in this way remotely. And we had actually arranged to go into the Rosa office today so that we could do the webinar there and sort of be looked after. But so it's a big learning curve for us to be doing this remotely, but we've obviously had to do more of this yesterday and today, and I just really hope you'll bear with us if we have glitches or if we're doing it in a way that, you know, where it's we're sometimes a bit sort of unsure about what we're doing. And we've also changed the way that we were going to deliver it, because a really central part of the webinar that we were planning was we were going to be joined by a woman we were going to call Anna, who is an asylum-seeking woman who'd been doing some media work recently alongside us very successfully. She was rightly very proud of that work, and it was, you know, it was really great, and you would have learned a lot from her. But I'm sorry she's not with us today. It's just in the current situation, we couldn't meet up with her to continue preparation, and we didn't want to put her health at risk by asking her to come out of her house and deliver it with us. So I'm sorry, I hope you understand and bear with us. So we have a handout. You'll see the link in the chat about what we're going to be doing in this webinar. But basically, we're going to be sharing our learning about how we enable refugee women to tell their stories on their own terms, to build solidarity at the grassroots, and also to influence the public through different means, and to try and create policy change. So I hope it feels like the objectives of the session are quite clear, that we want to show you how we do that work. We'd also love to learn from you guys. So as much as possible, we're going to be keeping an eye on the chat and seeing, you know, what your comments and any experience that you're sharing is. But as I say, we're a little bit unsure about the tech, so bear with us if we're slow to bring you in. We also really want to get in at the end into some practical tips on safeguarding and confidentiality, and talk a bit about, you know, we really want to empower women, but we really have to make sure that we're not kind of pushing women forward too fast if they're sharing personal stories of any kind. So Sam's going to talk us through some important practical tips on safeguarding and confidentiality. And we'll also, you know, that's also shared on the handout, and we'd love to continue those conversations later. Marchu, do you want to take us away on talking a bit more about Women for Refugee Women, and then Marchu will talk about the empowerment work?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for that, Natasha. And hello, everyone. Really nice to be here, although it's in my house, which feels a bit weird as well. I just want to say, like, this is going to be really strange, and if I'm talking fast, or if you have any questions while I'm talking, please just put it on the chat, and I'm keeping an eye on it, and my colleagues are too. So just, yeah, let's just make it as much interactive as possible. Sort of feels like we're, you know, propelled to 100 years down the line using these technologies, but let's make it work. So the way I'm going to talk about the work is that I'm going to start by talking about what we do at Women for Refugee Women, and then go really then to talk about why stories are important, and in particular I'm going to talk about the empowerment side of things that we do, and then Sam is going to talk about the influence, and Natasha the change side of the work that we're doing. So Women for Refugee Women, we were set up really to tell the stories of refugee women, and I think that has been the central aspect of what our values are and what we were set up to do to begin with. And obviously that has changed over time in how we do that, and that's really important. Over the 10-year or so time, we've developed this way of working with women. And so the way we work at the moment, we have 3 strands: empowerment, influence, and change. So the empowerment side covers all the kind of drop-in interaction that we have with refugee women at the grassroots level. So that includes our Monday drop-in. So this is what we used to do, and obviously things have changed. But I'm just going to talk about as if we continue to do these things, because the changes are very much recent. So we have a drop-in on Mondays where we see over 100 women who come to the drop-in for various activities. And that includes the mother and toddler group, English classes. We do intersectional feminism, we have lunch together, and so forth. So that is just a way for women to come together, to share, to build friendships, and so forth. But we also have specific other grassroots activities that are designed to help women really build their confidence and their skills of telling stories, or their journey, their personal story of the asylum process. And that is through the drama. We have a regular drama classes every Friday where up to 30 women attend. We also have specific courses that happen, such as the storytelling course. Other things that we have is things like the forum, which sorry, my voice is too low.
Sorry, Margie, your voice is a bit low.
Yes.
And Sam, I can't see the slides changing.
So I haven't.
Oh, you have. Okay, sorry. I thought you were going. Sorry.
No, I was just giving an overview, and then
I'm so sorry.
Into the details of it. So, and then also at the empowerment side, we've very much recently started working with regional partners. So we could, I could talk a bit about that later as well. So that's mainly the empowerment side. And then obviously the influence is more about the events, the public facing work we do through events and sharing the stories through the media. The change work is focused on changing policies for in the asylum process, and that's very important for us because obviously it's so difficult to help individuals because there are so many women in this situation. So it's really important that we change policies so that things are better overall. So I'm just now going to go individually to the particular aspects of the empowerment side of the work that we do and why stories are important. So stories, why are they important? And I think I want to start by saying, well, we are human beings and the way we think is based on stories, not statistics and numbers. And there's been many studies that have been done in the sector, and I'm sure in other sectors where people have tried to tell migrants contribute to the economy but using statistics, and really that doesn't work. What works is where people hear individual stories and can empathize and relate on an emotional level to their story. So this is so important because then we know how we need to frame the stories that we are telling to make change happen. I think the thing to remember is that to go beyond the mind, the thinking, and really reach down into the heart of people and really connect to people on a human to human level. Stories help to reframe our conversations in society and the society as a whole. So, but to reframe those, we need to enable women to reframe their own personal stories, to be able to also reframe the wider conversation on migration. So I think that's a really important thing to think about, like how stories help us to reframe. Okay, so I'm gonna start talking about our drop-in. So the Monday drop-ins and how they help women. So women come to the drop-ins at different levels, so different English language levels, different confidence levels, different experience. And the drop-ins are there just to help women come together, learn some English if they are attending English classes, or do some yoga, or go to the mother and toddler group, so that they don't feel isolated, so that they don't feel alone. And many women come to the drop-ins because this is the only place where they see their friends. There is a warm meal, there's a cup of tea, and they can be with their friends. Another thing about the drop-ins is where we have moved from just doing English classes to actually developing some of the sessions into what we call empowerment sessions, where, for example, we do have the intersectional feminism classes, which I'm going to come later to speak about. But that, you know, classes like that, or even some of the English classes, are geared towards developing understanding and knowledge, but also building confidence in the personal individual women. So, and that's really important for us. I'm now then going to talk a bit about our drop-in. Natasha and Sam, if I've forgot anything, please jump in, because I feel...
You're doing great. I'm feeling quite emotional seeing the pictures of everyone together,
yeah.
which we can't do at the moment. It's great. It's great.
Great. So, and then our drama. So we started our drama group about 4 years ago, and this is really so we used to have it on Fridays at the South Bank, and for about 20 to 30 women who come. And this is really to enable women to come together and through drama and performance, enable them to start sharing their stories. And we've been doing some work where we've developed poems. One of the main poems that we keep using is the Set Her Free poem, which was developed by a group of women, refugee women, who have had experience of detention. And so this woman, so there was about 10 women who initially developed the poem. And then through that poem, that any of the women in the group can perform it. So although when women initially wrote the poem, it was really personal and it was about the experience. But when it is performed, it is all the women coming and standing together and performing it. And that way, they don't feel so much that the attention is on them, or they don't need to be so vulnerable, because no one knows that this is their story. It could be any of the other women's stories. So to share the experience of detention through women coming together, refugee women coming together and saying, this happened to me, but when it's performed, you don't know whether they're talking about themselves or a generic I. And that's been really good to build confidence in women, but also to give platforms to women who, you know, frankly, is really scary to be on a panel or to give a speech, but through performances, then they can share their stories. Is that okay? Everyone, please put things on the chat so I know it's going well. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is the particular course we have, which is called Storytelling with a Purpose. And so, so we started this course a few years back. It's a 5-week course for refugee women, and we ginger public speaking. So this is a company, an organization who who really said that they can give us the time to do this this course with Refugee Women. And so it was great to have two really professionals who do public speaking training for, you know, corporates and really top leaders in different sectors to come and give that training to refugee women. And this is from one of our the picture you see is one of the most recent batch of women who completed the course. And I think the thing about the storytelling courses, what they enable women to do is to pick the story that women are able and willing and ready to share to the world, about through, you know, whatever aspect of the journey that they have been on. So women learn about how to tell their stories, and how to reframe their personal experiences. And the thing about it is that the way the facilitators work in this way is they tell the women, or they enable women to come to a realization that they have been through the struggles that they went through for a reason. And through the struggles that they've been through, they have become wiser and they have gained something to share to the world, and that their stories are really important. And I just want to give an example of one of the women who went on this course. I'm gonna call her Helen to keep confidentiality, but Helen came to this country a long time ago, but she has been in a very abusive relationship, and she couldn't get out of that relationship because of her asylum case was never resolved. So she couldn't go to a refuge. She didn't have anywhere to go. And when she came to us, she came to the drop-in. She was very depressed. She was very shy. She didn't want to speak to anyone. But she came on the storytelling course. And obviously she had been on a process, obviously, where she finally, because she had a mental breakdown, that she got help, and she was also getting her asylum case resolved. But when she came on the course, she realized that she had something that she can share to other refugee women like her. And one of the key aspects of the story she told when she shared it with the wider group was that don't remain silent, because that's what she did for a long time. So she really kind of took the space and the learning from her journey and was able to say to women again and again, don't remain silent about what is happening to you. Speak to people, try to find help as soon as you can. And I think that was really powerful for her, because Helen realized that, you know, she has something important to share to other women and to the world, which is about women should speak up about the abuses that they experience. And that was a really powerful journey for her. Natasha.
Can I just also add in there, March? I think everything you say is right, but I also just want to say I'm really struck always when I go to the way that the course ends is that the women share in our network, just to other refugee and asylum seeking women and us. There's no pressure to sort of speak out to the sort of wider public at the end of the course. And what I'm always struck by is how many of the women choose to share something, you know, about the sort of trauma they've passed through or the big journey. But it's also really interesting how Ginger obviously empower women to choose other things as well.
Yeah.
So some of them might choose something quite, you know, relatively minor that they want to share a story of something that they had learned through an experience in their childhood, or something a parent told them, or something like that. And I think that's also really, I just wanted to emphasize that, because Marcia, you probably take that for granted, but just to sort of share with the people who are here, that the pressure isn't on necessarily telling the full story of the asylum journey. Women are unable to choose what they will share. And as you'll see in that picture that we are sharing there, a couple of the women have got their certificates covering their faces, because, you know, we took a picture that we wanted to put on the internet, and so some of them chose to remain anonymous. So just as we go along, just to flag up some of those ways that we try and ensure that women feel safe.
Thank you, Natasha. Yeah. Yeah, and I guess I want to then move on to speaking out and the regional work that we do. So we've been doing also a group called the London Refugee Women's Forum. So this group came about through, again, a process where we did a 6-week campaigning and advocacy course, and we've done these courses twice now, where a group, so the women then who attend the group learn about public speaking, campaigning skills, advocacy, and then they then choose to form a group where they can then continue campaign on issues that they care about. And the first group very much was around the detention campaign we had, Set Her Free. A lot of the women went on to speak about detention and the need to end detention for asylum-seeking women. And this is the photo that you see here is Rahela Siddiqui, who was the chair of the London Refugee Women's Forum. And this is when we had the protest outside Yardswood, and she was speaking outside that. So yeah, and again, you know, working in such a way so that some of the women, obviously from the forum, were happy to tell their story, but others weren't. And it was really important to do the training so that they can speak for or on behalf of other refugee women who are experiencing this asylum process together. Okay, so I'm going to now move on to the intersectional feminism class.
Could I just very quickly interrupt with a techie point? Sorry.
Yes.
Natasha, I think when you're replying to people, you might need to put all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see it.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I'm not sure.
Right. I don't think people have seen my responses. Oh.
Don't worry.
Sorry, guys, you who have been messaging, I have been responding to you, but I'm so bad at this tech that you haven't been seeing my answers. So if you've asked a question or made a comment above and thought we were just ignoring you, we haven't, but I'll try and go back on them while in the next bit. And if I miss you out, actually, can I just catch up? So we had some real positive comments about the drama group. Is that all right, Sam?
Yeah, sure.
I'm trying to type them all in again. We had some great comments about the drama group and how people, like, you know, what Marcia was saying, what we've experienced about how women don't have to be individually exposed, but how can, you know, and a lovely comment from Kate Monkhouse there about, you know, really seeing it in a performance. So I just thanked you, Kate. And someone from Xenia said that they had the same, they did similar things. And I said, yeah, I think you participants probably really recognize this idea of like moving at women's own pace and not pushing them. And this is really vital for us. And someone asked about the contact for Ginger. I mean, I don't know if they'd be able to do more work, but I'll share their website at the end. And I think they have a sort of model for their storytelling sessions, which I'm sure we or they could share. Sorry about this, guys. And I'll go back and see if there was anything else. And make sure that from now on, you see all my messages, sorry.
So there's a question about who provides the training
Yes.
for the advocacy and campaigning. Actually, the most recent training we've done it internally, where, you know, Sam and Gemma and other colleagues provide those trainings. The first one we did, the first course, we worked jointly with the Refugee Council, and we had some external speakers to come and provide those particular workshops.
Yeah, and just to add, if people are interested in training on advocacy and campaigning, and you don't feel that you've got capacity in your own organisations or expertise on that, we'd really love to hear from you, because that is part of our work, to do more training on advocacy and campaigning. And, you know, obviously now is strange times, so some of that work can't take place in the normal way, but, you know, that's something that we'd love to sort of link up more on.
Yeah, okay. Shall I move on to the next section? Yeah. So the one thing I wanted to talk about, obviously, the storytelling so far I've talked about is more about when, you know, when journalists or events happen and we're telling the story, or we are asking women to tell their stories. But there has been a change in the way we work that now. And in particular, I want to highlight what happens at the intersectional feminism classes. So as part of our drop-in, we have, you know, we have English classes, but also one of the classes is called intersectional feminism classes. And in this class, we talk about, or the facilitators facilitate a session around gender oppression, silent system, racism, those topics that really are essential to understanding about the oppression and the different power structures that are operating on women's lives. And so that class has really opened really good discussions every week. There is really good discussions about how these things affect us as Black women, as refugees, as asylum seekers. So there's a lot of discussion on that, but also I think it's also where women were able to come together and share their stories of oppression, and really start to analyze why those particular issues are affecting them. And I just want to talk about a really important class that we had 2 years ago when the Me Too conversations were happening, in terms of across the globe, basically, where white women in Hollywood were saying Me Too about sexual abuses, and we shared those articles to the intersectional feminism group women, and we had a really good discussion. And it was really interesting because it came to a point where women were like, we didn't realize this happened to rich white women who with secure migration status, you know, who seem to have the world at their feet. And so just having that link that this violence or sexual violence or rape happens because they are a woman, not only because they are asylum seekers, was a really important conversation to have. And obviously the women then wanted to tell their story. They wanted to say Me Too, and get be heard, really. So then we invited a journalist, a BBC journalist, to come to the session to listen to women, and then she then went on to interview 3 women who were really interested in telling their story and to say me too. And so this kind of storytelling really came from the grassroots, that women wanted to tell a particular story, wanted to join in an international conversation that was happening at that time. And we were able to facilitate that by bringing in a journalist who told that story. So yeah, so I think in that way, women, you know, they knew the story that they wanted to tell. They also wanted to join in this conversation to make sure that refugee and asylum seekers' voices were included. So yeah, I think that was, maybe Sam, you can take up the.
Can I just say one thing there? Good point from Hira Larandos there, that this was also linked in not just to Me Too, but also to the Step Up Migrant Women campaign, which is really, really vital, because it was, you know, the kind of solidarity that's been growing across different organizations to ensure that the policy asks, you know, for all migrant women. So it was really great to be part of what other women were raising through the sector.
Yes, definitely. And I think the Step Up Migrant Women is a great campaign for us to be a part of, because it really gives another platform for women to speak up on their experiences, because obviously they can say Me Too, but women who are refugees, asylum seekers, have an extra, you know, they are made vulnerable because of their lack of security in their status. And then, you know, the whole issue of not being able to report such violence is really, you know, is really important for women to raise. So yeah.
Yep.
All right. Oh, hang on, having a PowerPoint.
Sam, do you want to?
Yes.
Oh, Sam, we've got I don't know if you can manage to keep an eye on the chat. Gabby's also asking about whether we can talk a bit about, you know, how we enable women to share quite intimate aspects of things like periods and bodies. But I know you're coming on to some of that, and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm now going to talk briefly about how this empowerment work that Marchu does at the grassroots feeds into our public-facing work to influence people, and particularly to change their hearts and minds. And as Marchu said, we know that stories are the most powerful way of establishing a human connection with people, and really kind of getting across that we are talking about individual human beings and not huge statistics which can sometimes feel impersonal. So what I'm going to do is talk about our most recent research, which is called Will I Ever Be Safe? And this report, I think we published it in February, and where it was so successful is that it had absolute buy-in from the 106 women who were involved and who spoke about their experiences of destitution while they were going through the asylum process.
So I'm sorry to come in. Can I just flag up that we work with amazing partners? It wasn't just our report. Can I just give a shout out? What's meant to Carag, Women with Hope, and so on, the Swansea Women's Group. So yeah, sorry, go on.
Exactly. So with partners across the UK, and so the women were involved at absolutely every stage. So that included developing the questionnaire that we asked them, conducting the research through peer-to-peer interviews, and also developing the policy asks and public messages. So the report is theirs, completely theirs. And I think that was really important for when we went on to get media coverage, because the women had absolute ownership of the content and the way in which the policy asks had been developed. So right at the start, before we had even begun the research, we ran some media training with a small group of women at a retreat in Manchester that Marchu had organised to bring together different partners. And in this media training, we talked a lot about different audiences. So the people who we wanted to connect with, and that is both our base audience for at Women for Refugee Women, this tends to be educated, fairly left-wing women who are often Guardian readers and read other women's publications, but also to try and reach out to more difficult audiences. So this might be MPs, but also readers of more central and possibly even right-wing publications. And we talked about developing simple messages that reach those audiences' hearts and minds. So the report contains a wealth of kind of hard-hitting evidence, which is really important for convincing people's minds, but also it's jam-packed full of women's stories, which are really powerful and help to establish that human connection. So once we talked about the messaging, we also built in lots of time to do media kind of role playing and interviewing each other as if we were speaking to a journalist, which was so much fun, and also just an opportunity to really build confidence and start to feel comfortable with using those messages that we had worked on together. And we kept doing this training with different groups of women throughout the process. And I think this background work was very important, because then when it came to talking to the women in our drop-in about the launch of the report, there were 8 women who felt like they knew enough about how the media works in the UK and felt confident enough to tell their own stories of seeking asylum and their experiences of destitution. So being homeless, hungry, and vulnerable to sexual abuse in the UK. I think, as Gabby was saying in the chat, that this is an incredibly sensitive topic. So the work at the grassroots to build women's confidence and establish that trust, and also the work that we did to talk to them about anonymity and how to speak out safely became really important. So in the end, we managed to get media coverage in quite a range of different platforms. Hopefully you can see them on your screen there. So it's a mixture of media outlets that reach our base, like The Guardian, BBC Women's Hour, and Galdem, but also some more challenging platforms like The Telegraph, where a journalist spoke to one woman and ghost wrote her story. So it was completely anonymous, but from her perspective. And this ended up being quite a powerful way of reaching a more challenging audience. And I'll come back to this a little bit later on to go through some practical tips on supporting women to tell their stories to the media. But I just wanted to highlight that this research wasn't all about telling stories in the media. We also did some different things, like it was accompanied with a photography project, because we're very aware that there's a real challenge around how homelessness and destitution is often presented, and that's with a lot of photography and imagery that is very male-centric and disempowering. So if you Google homelessness, you will see pages and pages of pictures of homeless men, photographs that have been taken by professional photographers with no input from those people themselves. And it starts to build a picture in the public consciousness, which is, well, doesn't include refugee women at all. So we wanted to give women themselves cameras so that they can take back control of some of that narrative and present the imagery that they wanted to share. So that was an important part, but also public events. So Marchu and the team organised a conference for refugee women across the country to come together alongside supporters and share their stories of destitution, but also to continue developing these campaign messages and thinking about how is the most effective way to speak out about this issue. And then we also, on International Women's Day, ran a singing action. So different groups across the country gathered together in solidarity with refugee women and sang songs of welcome, which was a really nice, positive way to bring people together and kind of share a soft message of solidarity, but also draw attention to the very heavy hitting issues that refugee women are facing. So I think now Natasha is going to talk about.
Yeah, I thought maybe we'll just go back to some of the questions that just a couple of questions. Is that okay? Because we've got this really interesting question from Emma Wakeling. March, I don't know if you've seen that. We'd be interested to hear how you facilitate conversations about feminism and oppression when women come from such different experiences, backgrounds and beliefs. Do you want to say something about the work that you've done with some classes like the intersectional feminism class or the Refugee Women's Forum to try and stimulate those kind of discussions?
Yeah, I think it is challenging. Obviously, women come from various backgrounds, as I said, beliefs and experiences. But I think what we've been really great at doing is to say that, you know, whether it's the intersectional feminism class or the forum or any aspect of the work, that we value everyone's opinion to create a space where people feel okay to share their beliefs, but also okay about being challenged about some of the beliefs that they hold. So I think it is challenging, and I think you need the right facilitators, and we've done a lot of work trying to find the right facilitator to have those sessions. And for example, one of the things that we've worked on in our intersectional feminism class is to make sure that it's a welcome, women understand the issue of LGBT, and I think that has been a process for some women who've come from a very strict religious backgrounds, where perhaps in the country that they've come from, being a lesbian is punishable by death. So it's really important to manage those conversations, but also to enable women to come to a process where they are developing new understandings about these issues. I don't know if that answers your question, Emma.
Yeah, do come in on the chat if you want to add more. Great. Yeah, I think the illustration of the LGBT issue in the group was important, because I don't think we went that much into the Rainbow Sisters empowerment group, which has been also a really important part of our empowerment strand, a group of lesbian and bisexual women. It's really grown. It's a very strong, very sort of mutually supportive group. But the issue was sort of how the wider network perceived that group. So there was a lot of work that had to be done. And I think it's fair to say, you know, that sometimes we're a bit shocked, or not shocked, you know, but not happy about some of the opinions or values or beliefs that women in the network are voicing. So we have to find a way of opening out those discussions and managing some of the, you know, the views that are being voiced, but really putting strongly, you know, the messages of inclusion and equal rights and so on. So it's a process. And I think
actually, one of the way we've done it is through telling stories, because we invited Lady Phil, who's the founder of Black Pride, to come and share her story. And it was so powerful, because women can connect with her just based on the story that she told. And it just gave the space then to be open and inclusive of lesbian women. So
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. And I think, and then Hannah's question about the balance between making policymakers aware that the group suffers huge issues versus the risk of those in the group feeling very doomed, criticized. I think that's also a really important question. And the way that we try and do that is very much about centering that empowerment work. So as Sam showed when we published the report, obviously a lot of the media work that we were doing did focus on the miserable experiences, you know, but then balancing that, we had the activities that were more about empowerment and, you know, where women could bring their whole selves, their resilient selves, their articulate selves, you know, their selves as survivors rather than victims, and feel recognized as their full selves, whether, you know, that was in the conference or in the singing actions. And personally, I find that very powerful because, you know, I come from a media background, and I think there is always that temptation in the media to you know, do a very simplistic framing around these issues. But if we can continue to engage women as their whole selves, that's you know, that's absolutely vital. And thank you for
also, sorry, I just want to that you know, the empowerment work is also enabling women to understand why they are criticized and judged for being a refugee. So it's about kind of analyzing those power structures, so that women understand that such criticism is not based on them individually, but more a general kind of, you know, based on racism and other oppressions that exist.
Absolutely. And that again has been very powerful for me to see women move from talking about their individual situation to being, you know, in these discussion groups, to link up and seeing how the individual situation is created by the policies, the policy situations, the politics of borders and colonialism and so on. And it's really, really interesting to see that grow. So I'm just going to talk really briefly. I see we're coming to the end of this hour, and we didn't want to go much beyond an hour, but we will go on for a bit. So I think I'll go really fast over this next bit. And then if it's of interest, you know, it's something we can always come back if you guys want to join us again another day, maybe talking about policy change. So all this empowerment work and the communications work, absolutely vital in itself, obviously, but we need to also see policy change. We don't want to just be recording and reflecting what's going on around us, but actually trying to create change. And so one of the vital ways that we do that is by campaigning and by making a noise to parliamentarians and those in a position to make policy change. We have worked over the last just over 5 years on the campaign against the detention of asylum-seeking women, the Set Her Free campaign. So I think I'll just sort of focus a little bit on that and how stories, sharing, when we started that campaign, there was really very little awareness of what women were experiencing in detention. And so part of the vital work, the work that became most vital was just about enabling women to tell their stories, their experiences of being in detention, and really enabling women to come to Parliament. And so the image here isn't actually a specific Set Her Free event, it's the All Women Count Lobby of Parliament, where we partnered up with a lot of different organisations, and the End to Detention was part of a range of demands that also included an end to destitution, greater safety in the UK. It was great to be joined by so many women. But just to go back quickly to the Set Her Free campaign, I think the only way that we managed to get any policy change, obviously we haven't managed to get an end to the detention of asylum-seeking women, which is the overall campaign aim. But we got some small policy changes around some greater protections for very vulnerable groups, particularly working alongside other organisations. We managed to achieve a time limit on the detention of pregnant women, because when we started the campaign, just pregnant women could be detained indefinitely like any other asylum-seeking woman. And by enabling pregnant women who've been detained while pregnant to actually speak out, tell their stories, and connect them to parliamentarians. We managed to achieve that limited change, and we did some effective media work where women told their stories very directly, and organised an event in Parliament where pregnant women were enabled to speak up in quite a protected way, working alongside Partners Medical Justice and Bat Murphy solicitors. And working cross-party with some backbench Tories who are unfortunately no longer MPs. So I just wanted to sort of flag that up as the importance of bringing storytelling also into Parliament. And there you can see a woman who's been in detention speaking with Diane Abbott after her visit to Yarlswood. And yeah, does anyone have any questions about the way that the work that we've been talking about links up into the policy work? Because I don't, like I say, want to go into too much detail at this point in the webinar. Great. And we have, as we've said, we do campaigning and advocacy training at the grassroots, so that we try not to bring women in just as sort of case studies to voice their story, but to engage in an ongoing way so that they can shape messages with us. Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to hand back now to Sam, because I do think it is important to cover some of these really practical tips about safeguarding, and I think that might also be probably helpful to others doing similar work. So do come on and ask any other questions. And I think, should we try and just do this for 10 more minutes, Sam? Is that?
I'll try and keep it brief.
10, 15, I mean, however long people want to go on, but I don't, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so most of what I'm going to talk about now is going to be practical tips specifically for media interviews, because when you're working with a journalist, there is kind of a shared storytelling, both the woman herself and through the journalist. And so there's various steps that you can do to try and make that a successful and positive experience for both parties, but particularly to make sure that the woman feels safe and comfortable with what she is sharing. And today we were hoping to be joined by a refugee woman called Anna, who recently spoke out around the launch of our report on Women's Hour. But for obvious reasons, she can't be joining us today, which is a shame. But I will kind of run through the process that we went through with her in the run up to her speaking out in that interview. So Anna has been a member of our Rainbow Sisters group for LGBT women for about a year now. So in that time, she had really built up her confidence a lot and become much more kind of understanding of her experiences, and had this shared experience of telling her story to other women in the network. And then she participated in the research as well. So she had that kind of feeling that the research was hers. So when I went in to speak to the Rainbow Sisters group about the report launch, Anna was one of the women who actively stepped forward and said that she wanted to share her story in the media. And I'll kind of run through the handout to explain the steps that we went through. So the first conversation was really about consent, as there was going to be a personal element to the story that she was sharing on Women's Hour. We wanted to make sure that she really understood what this means, that Women's Hour goes out on the radio to a wide audience, but is also on the internet. So it's forever and international. So people in her country of origin could be able to listen to it as well. So we kind of supported her to understand what this means and gave her lots of time to make a decision based on listening to other Women's Hour interviews. We talked to her about the presenter Jane Garvey and the kind of work that she had done before, and really spoke to her about what the actual interview would look like. So the fact that it would be pre-recorded, so if there was anything that she felt uncomfortable with after speaking, that this could be edited out, and that we also spoke a lot about her personal story and talked about what she did and didn't feel comfortable with sharing, so that some boundaries were established before going into the interview. In the end, she decided to use a different name, and that we would strip out all identifying details from her story. It was a radio piece, but she felt that her voice wasn't too distinctive, so she felt comfortable with speaking herself and not having an actor voicing over her words. And then obviously she wasn't in any photographs. But if it is a TV piece or there will be photographs, we do talk to women about how they would be happy for this to be done. So for example, you can film from the back of someone's head, or film hands, or film kind of over the shoulder, talking to the presenter and the journalist, rather than showing the woman's face. And I think it's quite important that women understand that any distinctive clothing or hairstyle, or they have tattoos or jewelry, could be visible. So to make sure that they have a way of covering this if they want to keep their anonymity protected. We have worked with Women's Hour before, so we know quite a lot about the show and we're able to share that with her. But if it's a new media outlet, it's really important to do your research on both the journalist and the outlet, so that there are no surprises in the way that the story is told, and that you're ready to establish really clear boundaries if you think it's going to be a more challenging interview. And then there's also a lot of support that you can offer someone in the run-up to the interview in terms of being a good advocate for them and communicating with the journalist to make sure that they understand the women's need for anonymity and any other boundaries, and then be ready to stand up for this actually during the interview. So we have had a couple of experiences where journalists have overstepped those boundaries that have been set before, and it has been important to stand up for the woman in that moment, because it can be very difficult to challenge a journalist when you're on the spot. So thinking about those things before is really important. And then in terms of logistics, arranging that interview somewhere that she will feel comfortable, that if it's going to be on the TV or radio, that it can be pre-recorded, or if it's speaking one-to-one with a journalist, that any particular needs in terms of interpreting or anything like that are covered, and that she understands the format of the interview and what it will be like, and then make sure that there's someone with her who she knows and trusts during the interview, that all her basic needs are covered. So she's comfortable, she knows where the toilet is, she knows that there's water and tissues available if she might need that. If it's a filmed piece, that she is mic'd up in a way that's sensitive. So many of the women that we work with are survivors of extreme sexual violence, to make sure that there is a woman helping her with a microphone rather than a man can be important. And also that she knows who everyone in the room is. So who the person with the, oh, sorry, just looking at the question.
No, it's fine, Sam. I'll bring in the questions. Don't get put off. You go on and finish up, and then we'll do the questions on this theme, okay?
Okay, great. Yeah, so that she knows, sorry, I've completely lost my train of thought. The, like if there's a camera person or producers in the room, that she's comfortable with who each of these people are. And then after the interview, it can be very important to just take some time to go for a cup of tea, to talk about how it went, to talk about any potential concerns that she might have about if she overshared something, or if she would like it to be to see the piece before it goes out. We always try to arrange with journalists before an interview that the woman will be able to review her input. So journalists won't always share with you the whole piece, but we always agree that we will see specific quotes from a woman before they go out publicly. And then talking to her about her plan for the day and how she's going to look after herself when she goes home. And if she's worried or you have any concerns about her mental health, where she's going to go to for support. So if your organisation provides this yourself, then that's obviously amazing, but also thinking about other potential places where you can refer her to for more specialist support. And then we follow up with the journalist to make any necessary corrections or to communicate a woman's preferences and make sure that all the boundaries have been adhered to. And then finally, just to say that when the piece does go out, it's really important that the woman herself gets to see it in its final form and that she feels happy with it, and that you can build on this. So the journalist gets any feedback, positive or negative, but also if there's positive people sharing it on social media or comments or donations that your organisation is receiving on the back of it, that the woman is completely aware of the positive difference that she has made. I think the process of making change can feel very long and like we're not moving anywhere. I heard someone describe it before as like when you're on an aeroplane and it feels like you're going nowhere, but then if you look on that little map you can see that you are slowly moving towards a destination. So sharing any small success is so important so that it feels worthwhile and the woman knows that she has contributed to making positive change. And then also just to say that if she wants to stay involved in further communications work or campaigning work, trying to make these opportunities available to her and continue this journey of empowerment and speaking out and story sharing.
Thank you so much, Sam. That's great. So Sam, don't try and read through the chat because it's tricky when you're talking. But I think this is a really, really vital question that came in from Natalia about how you challenge a journalist that isn't respecting the boundaries set by the survivor and advocate. Because obviously what we're trying to do is give quite a positive picture of the work and the sort of, inspirate, to try and inspire people and share some of the good things, but there have obviously been some really challenging times. So Sam, I don't know if you want to share anything on that or if you'd rather I shared an example.
Well, maybe if we both chip in, I can start by sharing. We did have one experience some time ago.
We don't have to mention the journalist.
No, I won't. But there was a woman who had been in detention fairly recently, and she was speaking out on the radio, and the journalist had been fully briefed on the parts of her story that she was and wasn't comfortable with sharing. The very first question was completely not respecting the boundaries that we had set before at all. So and that sent the woman into a panic. So I just had to step in straight away and cut across and ask her to stick to the agreed questions, which I think when you are in that position of supporting someone, it's very important to just go for it, not waste any time, not let it kind of escalate in any way.
Absolutely, and it can be obviously it can be difficult. And I remember once I was in a woman's, actually we were filming in her home environment with a very, very eminent news journalist, and he pressed her beyond where she wanted to go. And I had to stop the interview, take him aside and say, you know, she's just not happy sharing this. And he said, well, if he's not happy, if she's not happy sharing it with me, why don't we leave the camera running and you go in and ask her the questions? And I was so shocked. It seemed to me so unethical that he was asking me to trick her into sharing it. That was, you know, that was the end of the interview, basically. And I think it is really surprising to see how some journalists will work. But then on the other hand, I do think that recently, not just because of our work for sure, but work of a lot more people who've been speaking out and advocating for vulnerable interviewees. I do think there's a lot of journalists out there that really do respect people's boundaries. And, you know, when you find a journalist like that, you can work with them over time. And I think, you know, cultivating relationships with journalists that you know will work ethically can really bear fruit, and sharing knowledge in the sector. So-and-so's a good person, you know, we had this experience with them, I think is really important. And we're, you know, very grateful to other organisations that have shared their knowledge with us, as you know, and we try and share our knowledge with others. And we're always happy to chat to other organisations, you know, that may want to know how to get in touch with journalists that we've worked with, or any other tips. And I think, you know, in that, when you were talking about the media coverage around the report, Sam, you know, there were some really important personal relationships that you've developed there that paid off, or that we've worked with. You know, we've worked with Jane Garvey at Women's Hour over the years, as I think probably others in this webinar may have worked with Women's Hour. And I think, you know, we're all helping to develop the understanding of these presenters about the right ways to do these things. Sorry, I could go on about this for ages, but I also think, you know, giving feedback to the journalists, as I think, Sam, you touched on, is really important. Positive feedback if you like the piece, and telling them if you felt that something didn't work so well. You know, obviously even making a complaint if it really went wrong. But I think that's very, very important. Someone there was saying, we need to remember that journalists need us more than we need them. And I think that that's true over time. And sometimes in the heat of the moment, when we want to get a campaign or a story out there, we forget that. It feels very pressured. And that's why it's important to sort of plan over time and be proactive rather than just reacting to the news agenda, which I think is where small organisations like ours often get into trouble. If we try and react too fast, you know, we start pushing people or pushing ourselves to overreach.
Yeah. I just wanted to add that we do also turn down media interviews if we think they're not going to be kind of, if they're not going to be beneficial for the campaign, or if they're not going to be done in a way that is sensitive enough for the women that we work with. We always kind of think about the point of doing it, and make sure that the interviews that we arrange are moving in the right direction, that they're going to reach the people that we need to reach, and that they're going to be sensitive, and that the woman is going to have a positive experience and feel comfortable with what goes out there.
Absolutely. And someone's saying this, it helps if we integrate the media work with the advocacy work that we're doing. That helps answer the question, why tell? And I think that is really important, and why we see the media and policy work as all connected in with the empowerment and storytelling, so that women can hopefully over time, I mean, you know, we're obviously describing it, you know, in the best possible way, but we hope that women do really understand, you know, how what they're doing fits into wider campaigning work. Lorraine had a question about how, if someone, say, gets involved in a photography project, how do we sustain that over time? And I think that brings me into the last kind of things that I'd like to say in this webinar, which is we do try and sustain over time. And with the photography project that we ran for the report, Sam and me had great plans, didn't we, to go on doing the photography project in London, but also in other cities, and really sustain that work. And those talented and particularly engaged women, we wanted to go on working with them and to find others. Through the photography project. I think sustainability in all this work at the moment is the massive challenge that is facing us. So we've had one question about, you know, how does this work continue, or what are the sort of needs of the women we're working with in the current pandemic situation? And obviously our work is going to be shifting. We don't really know exactly how right now. We know that we aren't going to be able to be running face-to-face activities in the same way. We're going to be much more focused on the immediate needs of the women in our network and advocating for their survival needs in this emergency. But storytelling will remain obviously at the heart of what we do. We can't alert the public and politicians to the need to support these women unless we can tell them what is actually honestly going on with, say, a homeless woman who thinks she may have the virus and doesn't know how to self-isolate. These are the stories, you know, so there's going to be a shift in the stories that we're going to tell. There's going to be different ways that we're going to have to work on supporting women through telling their stories. But I do think, you know, the values that we, and I know you in the webinar that we can't hear from, but we're loving seeing your questions and comments, the values that we all share about respecting people and working in solidarity are going to remain at the heart of what we do, even if we're going to have to find other ways to deliver that. Sam and Marcia, I don't know if there's anything else you want to say, and I'll just look through the messages before we close.
No, I've asked everyone if anyone has any more questions. Yeah, I don't have anything to add. Yeah.
Karen, what organized, oh, sorry, you can't speak back to me, but I'll find out afterwards, maybe Karen Joseph, what, you know, what organization you work for, because I see you work with young women and girls who are homeless. And I think there's thanks, Alice Trust, thanks. There's a lot of, one of the things that is quite heartening in the current emergency is all the collaborative working that's going on. And before this webinar, I was on a call coordinated with NACOM that I know some of you who are here were also on, and about 100 organisations joined that call about how to advocate for migrants in the current emergency. So I know it wasn't going to be the focus of this particular webinar, but I think it's so important that we all stay in touch so that we can really advocate for the vulnerable people among us in these just unprecedented times. So yeah, thanks very much. Thanks very much for your time. Thank you.
Hello, do you mind if I chip in there?
Thank you, Hannah.
Hey, it's Hannah here from Rosa. I just want to extend a huge thanks, first of all, to Samantha, Marsha and Natasha for presenting this brilliant webinar. It's been so informative, and personally I found it really powerful to hear about these real life experiences rather than just sort of the theory of storytelling and sharing stories. And I really got a sense that the women you work with are taken on a journey and that their safety is paramount. And there were just sort of 3 words that sprung to my mind about this. It felt like your work was so respectful, sensitive and inclusive. It was just a thread throughout the entire webinar, I felt. And I really liked hearing about the consideration of the expected and the intended audience as well. I thought that was really interesting, and then leading to the kind of policy change and influencing work that you're doing as well. And the practical tips were fantastic, really useful. And I know there's just so much appetite to talk about the current situation with regard to the coronavirus. And I think we'll be exploring here at Rosa about ways that we might be able to facilitate this. And I know, having spoken to Natasha in particular, that, you know, we might be doing a follow-up webinar in response to this, because, you know, the chat's been really interesting. I think there's probably a desire for us to do some follow-up work. So we'll certainly be discussing that. And again, we'll be putting a link to this webinar up on our website. So we'll post out on social and through our newsletter when that's up. And let me see, was there anything else I wanted to say? Just thanks so much for joining. And I know you would have found that really useful. So
Thank
big
you so
thanks.
much, Rosa, for organising and hosting. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Pleasure.
bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.